right, welcome to another episode of the High Performance Podcast. I'm here as always, joined by my loyal co-host, Jacob Mosquita. And then we've got Deklan. What's your last name? Sorry. Declan McMichael.
It is
I just learned that today.
McMichael. You wouldn't be the first person to get that wrong. McMichael. So.
What did you say, guys? It's pretty straightforward.
McMichael.
Come on, man.
Yeah, I know. It's not like it's just a Samoan name or anything like that. No, like I said, because it's not even Deklan. It's like, in my head, it's Deklan or however I read your Instagram handle. So
yeah, I get Dylan a lot. Dylan is a very common one, which is understandable.
That makes sense. But I'll give everyone a bit of the backstory because it's funny how I actually became aware of Deklan in the first place was him disagreeing with me in my comment section about deloads. And so because I remember clicking on his profile and I was like, who is this cunt? And then I was like, oh, right, it's just this guy in his early 20s. He's bigger than me and he benches 200 kilos. Why would he give a fuck what I think? So I just went back to living my life and posting content. And I mean, I don't know when I followed. I think I saw Adam O'Mackey. I'm not so sure. He's the big jacked guy from Western Australia who like has a crazy gym on a farm or some shit like that. I think I saw him collabing on a post with you. I was like, oh, fuck me, you guys like putting out some content and stuff like that. It was a good post. And then, yeah, been sort of going back and forth ever since. So yeah, just wanted to shout that out because it's heaps sort of funny, just sort of obviously the online journey. I don't think you were even posting much content back then.
It was crazy. I'm actually surprised you even remember that. I was going to bring that up and spring that on you because I didn't think that you remembered, but that was like 2 or 3 years ago. I do remember disagreeing. Oh, so the post was like, deloads are like silly or not necessary or whatever. And now I actually tend to agree with you in a way, but back then I was not in agreement with that statement. And I and my friends, we like sent the post into the group chat and I was like, I don't know who sent it in, but was like, this is wrong. And coming in from the powerlifting perspective, we were like, you know, whatever. And I commented and then Angus actually put on the story. He's like something about like, you know that you've hit that nail on the head when all the fake natural powerlifters, and it was my first fake natural accusation. And I was like, yes. No.
Okay, this is crazy. So you're not crazy because that story post burnt so many relationships because so many people thought it was about them. It was about, did it say fake natty? Or did it just say...
It was like untested, I think. It was untested.
Yeah, it was untested because the person who it was about was someone who had just gone over it untested recently, who had just called me out a few times, and his mate was in... Him and his mate were actually in there. No, but you're like, I'm sure so you're big. About me. So I believe Russell Orhe when he says he's natty. I'm a natty optimist. So it's like, because I want to believe in my own potential. And don't get me wrong, like I have been red pilled, but I'm not like black pilled. You know what I mean? I just like, I know that anyone could be on it, but like the same way I know so many of the top apparently natty guys are probably on it. I also know so many guys who've run gear and they're still fucking useless. So sorry that wasn't me calling you out for not being natty, but also know that.
I'm going to pretend it was about me. I'm going to hold on to that one. I get them now.
Narratives are important.
I'm going to hold on to the original one. It is. And I was like fat and stupid back then. So it was a big deal for me. So I appreciate that. And I'm surprised that you want to make content. That you remembered that.
I love that. In any way.
There you go. It was actually towards the start, but it would have been.
Fuck yeah. Cause, dude, someone so pathetic wore that fucking... Actually, I'll just shout him out, Craig from Compound Performance. He was like, you called me a fake natty? And I was like, absolutely not. Like, there were so many genuinely roided up people on that post calling me stupid. How did you make that? Everyone has this 1v1 with me. I'm like, no, for me, it's 1v the world. Like, sorry, again, this is not fucking directed at you, Deklan. Anyway, let's get into fucking the good part of our relationship. Actually, no, before we get into that, all the awesome content you've made, people love the backstory. So what sort of got you interested in the gym in the first place? And I know you had like very much like a powerlifting sort of focus at the start, shifted more so into the hypertrophy side of things now, and even sort of blending it both together. So yeah, how'd you get here?
Well, I was actually going to do law. And then I realized if I wanted to do law at uni, I had to travel an hour from the Gold Coast to Brisbane. And I was like, I am not staying on the train for an hour. What could I do locally? Griffith University is local. And I had just kind of discovered powerlifting. And I was like, oh, I'll make that my whole identity. So I was like straight into exercise.
The laziness had set in.
It was like, okay, I'm finished high school. I'm not going to travel for another hour a day or 2 hours a day for the university. My current boss now in my rehab job was my powerlifting coach at the time. And he was like, physio is like quite old population. Sometimes it might be more chronic. It can be a little bit more tedious. And I was like, that sounds boring as shit. What about exercise science? I'll work with athletes, like a 17-year-old kid. I was just like, yeah, I'll definitely end up working with athletes because why wouldn't I? So I did exercise science and then went into exercise physiology. So 3 years exercise science, 1 year exercise physiology. All 4 years are practically useless in terms of like, if you wanted to work with athletes, all 4 years would be practically useless. There's some decent content in there, like it gave me the tools to understand anatomy, biomechanics, like physiology, the important stuff that I kind of post about now. But even after finishing uni, which was a year and a month ago, you still kind of are like, oh, how the hell do I help someone get out of pain? And what am I going to do with myself? Luckily, at the time, I had like kind of gotten comfortable creating content. Like this would have been, say, a year after we met on your deloads post. So I had like got into it a little bit. And I sort of started posting around December 2023. By the time I got to halfway through last year, I kind of hit the jackpot on a couple of reels.
Hell yeah.
And here we are, you've got to play to win. So it's a bit of a lottery thing going on there. I actually made a reel of an ego lifting compilation that got 200K and that was helpful. And then I made a reel sort of doing the whole science-based thing that did decently well. And so people sort of discovered me. And then over the last 6 months or so, like just actually putting out good content that is valuable and gets shares. And it's growing organically and stuff, which is cool. So I went from the law pathway to the exercise science, and then I do rehab and I coach online. So we work closely with the APL. So we're at all the national and any IPL world meets, but I don't think we're affiliated anymore. So Perform Well is the brand that I work for, and you guys would see us at any powerlifting competition. So we work closely with people like Colton, Theo Maddox, like the big names in Australia and across the world.
Fucking beast. Absolute fucking beast.
Yeah, those guys are crazy. And that is, to be fair,
explain them to the audience, because I think some of them will be aware, but then not enough people know about, especially Theo. I think Colton has had his breakout a bit.
So if you guys don't know, Colton is like, I guess, the strongest powerlifter alive. I haven't directly treated him, but my boss and my mentor Scott does, and we're actually very close. And I was able to sit in with Colton on a session, which was awesome. He is like the strongest man alive, I guess, other than John Hack, not Hack Squat. Jesus.
But he had a shot at the open world record. I know he just missed it. Was he weighing 120? I think normally it's about 120, 110. For all of it. He's a total specialist.
An actual good powerlifter. When I spoke to him, I think he was 120 or even 110 potentially, and he was like multiple, like single digit kilos away from John Hack's record, and I think he ended up missing it by about 5. But in the next few years, if they stay healthy, I imagine they will break the record and take it back, him and John. So Colton's crazy. Theo is
a space marine.
I guess Theo would be probably my prediction for him or Colton for hitting 505 first. Obviously, then Dan Griggs is close as well, but they're all coached by Thomas Lilly from Zero, who I know you know, Angus.
Friend of the show.
Yeah, so that's kind of the backstory. I then obviously with my own personal training as well, like I was a powerlifter, as you said. So
you're really fucking strong. So many elite powerlifters. Bench press is, especially with bench press, it seems like the one lift where a lot of powerlifters will still get outbenched by the bros. And that's such a generic statement. Obviously, the best benches in the world.
That's true.
In powerlifting. But you cracked is there any secrets, or you reckon you just built for that shit?
I've got a 6'2" wingspan, so I don't know if I'd say I was built for it, but I am decently good. I just enjoy it, and I think that like in any training endeavor, like anything that you enjoy is going to be so much easier to get good at. I mean, motivation is directly linked with motor unit recruitment, right? So if we enjoy something, we're motivated, we're literally going to be physiologically stronger. So there's a clear pathway there, but no, I just think that the secret is like bench two or three times a week for 3 years and get a bit fat and eat some carbs and max out. Like there's not really a secret. I have a method, but it's not going to be interesting for the podcast. That's for sure.
Are you influenced at all in your powerlifting systems by Thomas Lilly? Because I just have one question in regards to your bench program.
Absolutely.
What was your frequency?
Oh yeah, so I always used a 3 times frequency. I then had a surgery, 2023, had heaps of time off, lost everything. This is when I was up to 190 kilos. I lost everything, and I came back at about 150 for my first single. From there to 200, I only used the 2 times frequency. So when I came back, I actually decreased the frequency. I don't know if it helped me get there faster. I just had more muscle at the time because I was bodybuilding. So like, having more muscle helped, obviously. For like someone with a decent wingspan, I actually think 3 might be too much. So as a blanket statement, if you guys are listening, try 2. If you have a big arch, maybe you're a smaller guy, especially a smaller woman, maybe try 3. But I have done Thomas's course and worked closely with Thomas. So my stance, I have actually talked to Thomas recently about frequency as well. And I think it is overrated in powerlifting for sure. I think specificity as a whole is horridly overrated, and I think Thomas would probably agree with that.
Nice. Jacob, I know you have a question, but I just also want to inquire, Declan, you don't seem to have the identity crisis that a lot of exercise physiologists have, because it is a bit of a weird thing, like, because we have a fair bit of an international audience as well, and I don't even think they know what that is. But do you have any thoughts on that? Or like you just like, I've mostly just worked with powerlifters and no, because you do the rehab as well. But again, you're not a physio. So like, yeah, thoughts.
It's a tricky one. I think, for your international listeners, I think it's kinesiology if you're in America. It's basically, you just do exercise science and then you do like a year of like learning how Medicare works. So it's not really a rehab degree by any means, but it is a rehab degree, but I got lucky in that I found like the niche that I have. And so I'm like also knew good people. And I think sometimes I look at myself as lucky, I know Thomas, so I'm in with powerlifting in Australia. I happen to know my boss, Scott, so I'm in with the rehab brand that looks after the entire federation. I guess I got lucky in a way. But I don't know. I obviously know a lot of EPs because I went to uni with them. And I think that a lot of them now are sort of finding out that it's actually really hard to do rehab. Like it's actually a really hard job, and it's all well and good to see like E3 rehab on Instagram or like Adam Meekins and be like, oh, I could totally just like read a study and put up a thing and I could do like an ACL but it's actually really hard. And, I work alongside probably one of the best physios in the country, treating some of the strongest powerlifters in the world. And it doesn't get much better in terms of mentoring than that. And it is still really hard to help. Aside from like, adjust the range of motion, adjust the load, sort of manage the load. Aside from that, if that's not the solution, it's actually really tricky. So I empathize with people
and the
who are
stakes are really high as well, I think. Even if
absolutely.
In theory, you just load up and down. It's like, yeah, but if you mess that up, it's like you set them back another ACL surgery. Like,
you get someone look you in the eyes and be like, powerlifting is my entire identity. I need to compete this year. I'm injured. Can you please help me? That is a big weight on your shoulder. That hasn't happened to me, but I can imagine that is a big weight on your shoulders.
If you want to learn more about the general physical preparation training philosophy, we put together an extremely practical course covering all the different aspects of physical preparation, as well as a unit on programming, so you know how to tie it all together and produce the same world-class results that we get with our athletes. We've got pre-recorded lectures, a community page where you can ask questions and interact with the other GPP coaches, as well as monthly calls where you can ask questions live or just catch up and hang out with us. Check out the link in the show notes for more info.
Yeah, big crossroad there for sure. I had a question about sort of from your education from exercise science onto these very niche, not very niche, but very insightful hypertrophy topics that you're posting. What was your sort of first influence coming out of exercise science that sort of opened up your mind to all of these different topics?
So I vividly remember coming across Coach Cass, Angus, about the same time you made that post with the swimmers. And I remember seeing that post and getting so angry at you. I was like, this is so stupid. Angus is wrong. Because I really liked Coach Cass, and he was probably the first person that I like found. I just saw him do the single arm pull downs, and I was like, that looks really cool. Like, that's different. That I haven't done that before. Like, I just did anatomy at uni. I'm a genius. I know that the lat does like shoulder extension in the sagittal plane. I should try this as well. And that kind of led to, you know, discovering someone like JPG, or just like finding out about like the whole evidence-based practice in general. Now I'm at a point where like I've actually gone back and forward with Cass, and I've like gone back and forward with these people that I started with, which is like a really like full circle moment, which is awesome. I mean, now I'm on this podcast as well. Like I'm sort of getting to know these people that I sort of saw from a distance. But yeah, I mean, someone like Coach Cass, I think there's a lot of people come across it because it sort of looks a bit silly or whatever. And then it's sort of changed up. And I've obviously been influenced, as Angus said, by Adam O'Mackey, who's probably one of the better coaches in the country, if I had to put my money on it in terms of bodybuilding. So yeah, just Instagram stuff. I think my biggest one for sure would be Joe Bennett, so hypertrophy coach. And if there was ever an instance where I got to shadow him closer, that would be something that I definitely wanted to do. But yeah, it's definitely started with Coach Cass, and I'm sure one day I'll end up at an N1 anatomy thing, in spite of Angus's opinion, whatever. But yeah, definitely.
No, I got over it.
I'm not going to put words in your mouth, Angus. I'm just going.
I took some things he said about Bill Hartman really personally, as you do. And then I just made all the memes about him. And I've had time to reflect on that. I was I still think the whole situation was funny, but I was definitely a dick. Like, anyway, whatever. I'll amend things with Kassem because we're going to get him on the show at some point. We'll see. It'd be good content to do it again and do it properly. But I actually, so now that we've dropped a few names, I actually want to sort of talk about the whole sort of identities in the hypertrophy space, or it's the fitness space as a whole, but some of these that I'm about to name are hypertrophy or bodybuilding specific, because you've sort of got, there's evidence-based, but in the hypertrophy space, it usually gets referred to as science-based. So I think even they're slightly separate communities versus the bro science. And then there's also the optimal. And again, I think a lot of these, I mean, they're really just used as terms to slander people and I guess more content creator identities. But yeah, so what are your thoughts? Are you attributed to one more so than the other? Whether it's by the people who follow you or self-identification, and then some commentary on the other movements. And then I've got more questions. So does Jacob, I guess.
Well, I put on my story today, I made it into an edit from TikTok of a bunch of like optimal lifters, and it was like making fun of like Dr. Mike and stuff. So I guess that was the first time. I mean, I've definitely been referred to as that. I had someone in the gym the other day be like, oh, I'll show you his Instagram. He's one of those optimal guys. So like, I guess I do get labeled as like that.
And how did that make you feel?
Amongst people. Is
that good or bad in your eyes?
I knew it was a compliment when he said it. I have also been said the same word, like the same. I've been called that as an insult as well. So I guess it's just like growing up in Australia, like you might call someone gay who you liked, or someone else might, not me, someone else might use that word in a positive way, whereas you could obviously use it in a negative way as well. So it's definitely open to interpretation what they mean by that. I usually take it as a compliment. I think that, you know, getting an EP degree, and we call it like evidence-based practice, right? So I think that I just approach bodybuilding in the same, it means it's like, you know, evidence-based practice doesn't just mean studies. It actually means experience and anecdotes as well. I think that's where people go wrong. It's like evidence is not just data from some lab coat. It's also from coaches who have lots of experience and your own anecdotal experience and that sort of thing. So like evidence-based practice encompasses a whole thing. It's not a popular term. I think optimal evidence science, it's all the same thing. I think that the phrase like science-based is like the gimmicky one that like is getting shit on a lot. optimal, I think, is just like a more of a gimmick word as well. I don't know if it holds any weight, but I think they're more or less all the same.
That's a good point, because even like the bros that talk about, I smashed this lateral raise variation, it really helped me. Like, that is a form of evidence at the end of the day. It's your own. So yeah, it's a good way of putting it, pretty much. Yeah. Same people.
Well, we got plenty of results before that, but then, and I tend to agree with Declan. It really just is like a source of content and just to simplify things and categorize people at the end of the day. But I think then there's like specific topics within all this, these identities where there's certain disagreements, and I'm always curious to get different people's opinion on it. This is, and I apologize both to Declan and also the listeners for maybe treating all our hypertrophy-oriented guests and putting them through a similar lightning rounds. But at the end of the day, like, these are the things I'm also most curious about. No, I added a new one for Declan, actually, so there's at least one new one in there. All right, let's just get this one out of the way. Well, there's plenty more of these. We'll feel the same way about lengthened partials. What's doing?
Just in general, what's doing? Not.
I can go more if you want.
Hopefully we're not doing lengthened partials at this point. So I'll kind of, for those listening, basically like a lengthened partial would be either during your set, at the end of your set, instead of completing a full repetition, you would complete a partial repetition in the lengthened position, right? So the reason that you might do this was because you saw Jeff Nippard talking about it, or Dr. Mike Israel, and one other name that I don't care to mention. And if you had seen that, it wouldn't surprise me, because that's very, very popular. Those guys are the biggest voices in our industry. Basically, the hypothesis is that the stretch, grows more muscle, right? And that is true for some muscles.
Because this started in full ROM, right? Even in the full ROM era, I feel like there was also, it's like full ROM, but also it's like if you can emphasize the stretch, it's a little bit nicer. And then all of a sudden there was it just once a study did come out where someone was like, let's look at just the stretch then, because it was almost blasphemous, this idea of moving away from full ROM. I mean, even I think I identified as a bit of a full ROM zealot for a bit.
Well, I mean, I would, at this point, I would identify as someone who uses a full range of motion. If you had to put a label on it, like, that seems to be the most evidence-based practice, in my opinion. So I think it sort of came from the idea that, like, using a full range of motion is like the optimal thing to do. But then you look back at clips and it's like, oh, well, all these bodybuilders sort of like ego lifting, doing partials, like, were they onto something? It's like, well, no, they were just lifting too heavy and they couldn't do a full repetition. It happened to be in the lengthened portion because that's how biomechanics works. But then we sort of, why don't we just look at that? Do we actually need to fully shorten a muscle? Do we need to do a full range of motion, or can we just use a partial? And basically, in untrained lifters, anything you do will work. And that is the same as people on steroids, right? You can take steroids, sit on the couch, grow muscle more than someone who's in the gym naturally. So to look to an untrained individual, to look to someone on steroids, it doesn't give you accurate outcomes because the mechanisms are different. They're getting, the newer lifters are getting growth from basically anything, right? Because the stimulus is so novel. And then the people using steroids are getting a stimulus from sitting on the couch. So those are really, that's your anecdote would be bodybuilders, and then your study would be untrained lifters. Most of us fall in the category where you're not taking anabolic steroids and you're not a new lifter. So really, the sources of this information are quite literally not at all the people who are listening to this information. And basically the way it works, like if we was to strip it back to like its mechanism would just be that, like, you need high threshold motor unit recruitment to grow, right? So you'd have high threshold motor unit recruitment if your effort was super high and you were using a full range of motion to complete a rep, because that is really hard. When you go to partials and you can pump out more reps, I mean, you don't have the same high threshold motor unit recruitment because you're not actually doing the full rep. You're doing a portion of the rep that is easier. And to do an easier portion of the rep, it is not recruiting as many high threshold motor units. And that is just a really complex way of saying it feels harder, it creates more fatigue, and those things are often linked with the hypertrophy, feeling harder, being more tired, but those things do not actually increase hypertrophy. And in fact, those things would decrease hypertrophy. So it doesn't make any sense for a trained lifter to ever do a lengthened partial other than an accident. If you were trained to failure and you tried another rep and you couldn't do it, that is not the end of the world if it was a lengthened partial.
am I also hearing maybe that there has been an overemphasis on this concept of tension, maybe? Because you can get a lot of passive tension in the lengthened position where it's like, no, that's useful because it's something that we can sense. Like I don't know if I can necessarily sense motor unit recruitment, but at the end of the day, it is more about motor unit recruitment than tension. And then again, a lot of tension in certain positions can maybe be passive. Is that a reasonable hypothesis and interpretation of what you're saying, or is that a little bit half-baked? Probably half-baked.
Well, passive tension is the mechanism, right? So it just depends on whether or not you believe that passive tension is experienced by every muscle. So if you were like me and you believe that it was not experienced by every muscle, then you would say that only some muscles need a stretch. And you would say, if you were really like in the niche of optimal lifting, you would say that it would just be pecs and lower body and maybe delts. If you were like a science-based big account, you would say every muscle needs a big stretch, right? And so that would be believing that every muscle experience passive tension. And that's based on the length-tension relationship. So muscles, like their sarcomeres exist on, it's basically a graph, and it just shows you like if a muscle can experience active insufficiency, which just means at a shorter length, it's super, super weak and won't experience growth. Like the bicep up here in like a Superman curl is absolutely awful. This is like active insufficiency. Same with like the hamstrings, right?
Hamstring? Yeah.
So like if you were to get it up into like a standing leg curl machine, you would feel like a crazy cramp.
Opposite, right?
Glutes, you kind of, we don't really know for sure.
Glutes are pretty strong in a lengthen, but more strong in shortened than a bicep or a hamstring, I think, right?
Yeah, so the glutes actually had the greatest internal momentum in the shortened position, which means you do want to lock out your hip thrust if you wanted to maximize hypertrophy. So yeah, back to the passive tension thing. It just means that some muscles experience it and some don't. We're not really sure what the mechanism is. The best proposed mechanism, in my opinion, would be what Chris Beardsley proposed, and that would be sarcomerogenesis. There are people who say that doesn't occur in humans. All that means is that like basically what's the easiest way? When you start training and you haven't experienced sarcomerogenesis before, each individual sarcomere within the muscle fiber can experience a big stimulus. And then once they experience that stimulus and you add more sarcomeres, each individual sarcomere is then experiencing less of a stimulus because there's more of them, so more of them share the same stimulus. Which what that means in practice is that when you start training, you are able to experience these stretch gains. Then as you become a trained lifter and you have more sarcomeres, according to sarcomerogenesis, titin, which is the protein in the sarcomere, can't experience the stimulus, and thus it will not continue to multiply in that fashion. So all that means, again, I don't want to try to like confuse any of the audience, but all that means is like when you're a beginner, get a stretch. When you're an advanced lifter, probably get a stretch like a couple of times a week, but it's not going to give you anything extra if you use like this much of a stretch versus like this much. There's no difference.
Yeah, fucking hell. We're not that certain about much when it comes to building. Well, it's like we aren't in terms of when you go down like very specific mechanisms, but then it's like we all kind of know what works. Like fucking hell.
I mean, we do. It's right. It's like just do like a 2 times frequency, do like 2 sets and train hard. That's all you need. But we're not even sure why soreness happens. We don't even know what the mechanism of DOMS is. So we really don't know that much. And there are some proposed theories, and even the people a lot smarter than me have got no idea really what the definitive answer is.
So why do like accounts like Jeff Nippert, when they're doing like these rankings on these YouTube channels of the best exercises, they're going straight? You just see the trends from the leg video, from the arm video. It's just everything's lengthened. What are they going off there?
Thing was pretty heavy.
So it's funny because in the last 2 months, and literally this week, there was a study done on the leg press, and you guys might have seen this. I posted about it, Menno posted about it, Milo, everyone. And it showed that half ROM leg press and full ROM leg press there's no difference in trained lifters, which just means that trained lifters, and in accordance with what people like myself and Chris and Paul and those guys, Jake, would say, that trained lifters don't need a big stretch. And there is literally no way to explain that study other than the fact that trained lifters don't need a big stretch on every movement to maximize hypertrophy. There is literally no other way to explain that.
it just seems like anything that they explore that sounds like it could be a hack, it's like, it's probably not gonna be. Like, it's probably gonna be just finding a new way that we could build muscle, and odds of it being like, and yeah, depending on, because obviously the data accumulates, it usually has a lean, either positive or negative, but then over time, as more data comes out, it all just files into the middle. Talk to me about neuromechanical matching. The GPP group program is the best deal in strength and conditioning. For less than $1 a day, you get access to my programming, as well as access to me through a group chat where you can reach out, ask questions, or have a form check. You can even get a week for free before you commit to it. Check out the show notes for more info.
Basically, what you would how you would explain neuromechanical matching is that the brain, and I'm not an expert on this, but the brain kind of operates from an efficiency standpoint, right? So at any given time, to be efficient, your brain would then recruit the muscle that had the best potential to produce the most force. And we can look at what muscles have the most potential to produce force by their internal moment arms, right? So that's just math on the inside of the body that you can't see, but we can measure with the study. So in the instance that one muscle had a greater leverage at a certain joint angle, the brain would tell that muscle to do the job. In the instance that another muscle had better leverage, or the leverage changes as the joint angle changes, the brain then tells the other muscle to start working harder, because why would you ask a weaker muscle to do a job that a stronger muscle could do? And I'm not saying weaker and stronger in the sense that one is bigger or smaller. It's weaker or stronger in the sense that at that certain position, it is capable of producing more force based on the architecture of the muscle and the position and the biomechanics. So neuromechanical matching basically just tells us that you can look to internal moment arm data in studies to then predict activation. And if you can predict activation, then you can theoretically predict the outcome, right? So like if a muscle is more active, then it can produce more force. If it can produce more force, it is then experiencing more tension. And then if it experiences more mechanical tension, it is then going to grow more, since that's the stimulus. People do not like neuromechanical matching, maybe because Paul Carter talks about it and people don't like Paul Carter. And I
mean, I'll be honest, I don't like Paul Carter, but a lot of people I respect still like him. So that's why I'm still open to like, he must be right about some stuff. Like,
there's I think there's flaws in the way that everybody communicates. I don't know if any of us are perfect communicators. So.
No, but you're right in the sense that if Paul Carter says anything, you can guarantee probably 3 or 4 people will make a video directly responding to it and disagreeing, regardless. Like, and it feels that way about a number of issues from different people.
100% that will be the case. People, there are big accounts that many people listening will follow and know that have like directly made fun of Paul as well. So, I'm by no means defending the way that he sometimes communicates. Like if that's what he wants to do, that's cool. But I actually am mentoring with Chris at the moment. So we're talking about neuromechanical matching. He's kind of the leading, believer in that, and other than the scientist who discovered it. But that would just basically tell us that if you look to studies to see internal moment arms, look at graphs, you can go, okay, well, I know that like at 20 degrees of elbow flexion, the bicep is going to be activated preferentially because it has the best, the best length tension relationship, which is a different topic. But basically, you can just look to see where muscles are going to be stronger and produce more force, and then experience more growth. So it's a very it's a tricky name and it sounds complex, but it's just like, where are my muscles the strongest? Okay, it's strongest here. I'm going to train it here. So, my glutes are strongest at lockout. Well, maybe I should do a hip thrust that loads lockout. Like, it's very simple in practice. It just sounds quite difficult.
And does this mainly, as far as the application of this concept and whether you agree with it or not, I imagine it causes disagreements in exercise selection based on how much you emphasize the stretch, or are there more implications there? It's mostly just a counter argument to this perpetual stretching of everything.
Yes, because then you could look at something like the lats, for example, and this is where someone like Paul and Coach Cass would butt heads, is the dumbbell pullover, right? So everyone has seen this dumbass argument that's been going on forever. I hate it because it's a shit exercise anyway. It's got nothing to do with the length, nothing to do with the stretch. It's just this is not a good position to be in when you can hold a 70 kilo dumbbell. That's enough of an argument to be said about the pullover. But basically, like, according to neuromechanical matching, the lats would not have leverage to produce force up here. So like that would make the dumbbell pullover not a good exercise. But if you
I'm going to
believe
send
that
this to Atlas so he calls you out, then you have to deal with that prick.
Atlas, power shrugged. Yeah, no,
Atlas
I know
power
him.
cupped or something.
Yeah. So I don't have a stance on him, but I do know who he is. But basically, if you believe that every muscle can experience a stretch stimulus, then you would say a dumbbell pullover is a really good exercise because this is a big stretch for the lats. And you would say it was a big stretch for the lats because you get a sensation in your sore. That could just mean, again, the mechanism for being sore could be just that the nerve is put at a longer length and actually stretched. So you might be stretching nerves through here that are like in your lat, around your lat, and you get a lat sensation, what you think is a lat sensation, but could just be a nerve sensation, and that's got nothing to do with the actual muscle. So that would be the rebuttal for like, I feel my lats in a pullover. It's like, yeah, sure, you're stretching a nerve. The same way that you can do a tabletop test with a physio and get a sensation behind your knee and the calf from a nerve. It's not your calf, it's a nerve, but it feels like your calf. So
okay, see, I was going back to sensation because as much as I was open to the idea that sensation isn't everything, there was also just this other thing in my head. I'm like, man, when you hit like a good fucking hip hinge, or just when you hit like just a good knee flexion or something like that and actually create a momentum, I'm like, you just get so much sensation. But you're right, that is a great example of something where I could imagine it producing a lot of sensation, like so many nerves running through that thing. That could get compressed or something like that. So, yeah. Again, yeah, not throwing sensation out, but not going.
The neuromechanical matching thing, other than the pullover, so then you would look at...
What about a reverse Nordic?
Oh, just garbage. I hate them for hypertrophy. I can't comment from an S&C perspective, but for hypertrophy, I mean, it's just eccentric overload training, right? So like you're literally just, in the sense that maybe it's like a injury prevention mechanism. I don't know. I never go into that stuff, but the growth happens in the contraction, right? The actin and myosin cross bridging. You don't get in the eccentric. They pull apart. They actually elongate, like they're further apart. You don't get cross bridging. So, if you believe that passive tension again was a huge, big stimulus for everyone, you might say wait, did you say reverse Nordics or
reverse Nordics? Reverse Nordics. No, but because I know also. Yeah, no, but again, hamstrings. I hate fucking Nordics. We can get into all the reasons.
Okay, well, we're in agreement. Reverse Nordics for the quads. That wouldn't be an issue of neuromechanical matching because technically the quads will do that job. They do have leverage there. It's just that, and I have made videos on this topic, and Milo refuses to communicate with me for whatever reason. But the sissy squat, the reverse Nordic, they will never ever not enough followers, bigger muscles, but not enough followers. They will never ever outperform the leg extension because there are two main issues with the sissy squat and the reverse Nordic. The first one is the ability to load them. How am I, a 100 kilo male, ever going to load a reverse Nordic in a way that is sustainable and isn't limited by like trunk stability, like my ab strength in general, my forearms, my like pain tolerance to holding a plate? How am I ever going to load that? I can, as you said, I can bench 200 kilos. Why would that be a good recommendation for me?
That's why you need Brett Contreras' power pole. Well, you just found an application for it.
There you go. It's useful. He does some interesting. I like Brett, but he does some very interesting things. And then that's the reverse Nordic, and then the sissy squat is just horridly unstable. Again, if I can squat 250 kilos, how the hell am I going to load a sissy squat? It's just not possible. So there are big drawbacks in that application of those things. It's not neuromechanical matching, but that is the whole that scope is. If an exercise has a longer muscle length, it is therefore a better exercise. And that would be a huge overstatement because there is 10, 15 things to exercise selection and probably 5 main ones that we look at on a daily basis. Probably 2 main ones if you were coaching Gen Pop, like, is it easy to do and is it fun? And then you would, where does length come in there? It doesn't come in there at all. But I can try to think of another example where the neuromechanical matching. Oh, so the long head of the tricep, right? So the long head of the tricep up here in this position, it will lose its internal moment arm. So you won't really get the long head up overhead in those high degrees of shoulder flexion. If you believe that these triceps need a stretch, if you believe that every muscle experiences passive tension, you will say the long head will grow there because it is at a longer length since it crosses the shoulder. If you believe in neuromechanical matching and you believe that internal moment arms predict activation, which predicts growth, then you would say, well, if you want to train the long head the best, you do a single arm push down or a cross body extension or something where you're in the anatomical position with your arms by your side. So that and the lats thing, those are the two big ones. If you wanted to train in the long head of the tricep, you would be in more shoulder extension because then it can do shoulder extension and elbow extension, which is its job, and where it has the best internal moment arm would be at 90 degrees in a tricep push down. So, but those are the two main examples.
I like how you're explaining, like, even if people disagree with the side that you lay on, like how they can apply the concepts from the other side. So
This is the
pragmatic.
thing. People go, oh, well, like, you're wrong about this, or what if you're wrong? It's like, okay, well, if I am wrong, I was already training triceps overhead when I do my banded JM press. And if I am wrong about the lats, well, then I will have lost out on some growth. But I'm not, I don't think that I am wrong. But for the tricep example, it's like, okay, well, if you're unsure, you don't believe me, you kind of believe Jeff, but maybe you believe both of us. It's like, well, just do an overhead movement and then do a movement by your side and do them on separate days. And worst comes to worst, you're missing out on like a tiny, tiny bit of growth over a long period of time. So that there's really not much that can go wrong. But this is the thing, it's so hard to be nuanced like that on the internet. Like, I know that if I am wrong about the long head of the tricep, I was already training it. And so it doesn't matter. But if you don't have the nuanced, like logical thought process behind where you make decisions and you just copy influences, you will miss out on things because you don't have like a backup plan. And anyone who sort of coaches people will always have like well, if I'm wrong about this, what would I be wrong about? And if I was, what would be the implication of that? And so it's just like, well, just do a JM press and do a single arm push down. Like, it's so simple. It really doesn't. It shouldn't be as big of a deal as it's made out to be.
I think it's really underrated as well. And not enough coaches think about contingencies for what if I am wrong about this, because being wrong about some things will completely kill your gains. Being wrong about other things may not matter much at all. And you may also be able to hedge into both without sort of fucking up your program too much. So absolutely on fire today. Mm-hmm. I want to talk about volume. Let's obviously create two camps and then we'll attempt to destroy one. So there's high volume, stupidly high volume, 40 sets plus. What was the set? Was it 50 sets or some shit like
52,
that? Some crazy
52
shit.
Lengthened partial.
Jesus fucking Christ. And then low volume. Can we define low volume? And that is a question as well, not an order. Like, do you think low volume is something where you can be like, yeah, when people say low volume on the internet, they mean within this number? Or do you think even like, is there the Dorian versus the Metz, or Dorian and Metz where they were friends with? But yeah, is there disagreement there?
So if you were to hear the term low volume, you could reliably assume someone was referring to 10 or less sets. If I was to say low volume, you could expect 4 or less, maybe. We can, yes, with this to be per week. So I think that we first have to sort of break down like what volume would be, right? So we're just literally talking about one set of a resistance exercise. And so people then make the claim that higher volume is better. And I guess that goes back to anecdotes. It goes back to the fact that if we feel like we are working hard, we assume we are getting more out of it, which might be the case in business, might be the case in running. I don't know. It does not work that way for hypertrophy. Certainly working harder in terms of effort, in terms of intensity, training a set close to failure, which actually, that is your high threshold motor unit recruitment. But the higher volume camp, which is totally wrong, and I won't change my mind on it ever, but they come from the idea. I pretend to be open to stuff. I'm just super rigid behind the scenes now. So the studies, again, they're done in. So
I will try to explain them without bias, and then I will. So basically, they do resistance training studies, and typically the people they use are untrained individuals, and that's fair enough, because why would I ever participate in a study for less than 50 grand? Any trained person's not going to give up their gains for a study. And they do these studies for a while, and they typically find that people who do more volume will experience more hypertrophy than people who do less volume. And that's totally logical. They've done more work. You would expect the stimulus to increase because everything else has increased. Why wouldn't the stimulus increase proportionately? They then arrive at the idea 2015-ish, Brad Schoenfeld is actually well, maybe there's a diminishing return. Maybe these return on investment stops somewhere. Maybe it stops about 25 sets a week. Maybe it stops at 30 sets a week. And then they do studies in the last, I think since 2017, meta-analyses and stuff, and they show that maybe up to 52 sets a week in the quads has shown some growth, more growth than less than 52. And I mean, for obvious reasons, that is completely just ridiculous. There's better words that I won't use for that idea. But so that would be my best attempt at giving an unbiased explanation of how these things work. I'll give my biased explanation now. So basically, when you do a study, you are going to use an untrained individual, because trained individuals like myself would never participate in a study, really. Maybe I will one day in this line of work. But so first of all, like I said before, with the passive tension, the stretching and all that kind of thing, is that they will be susceptible to any stimulus. So you can throw anything at a beginner and they will progress. And we know that. You've worked with beginners, I have. They will grow from anything. Basically, because a beginner does not have what we call neural adaptations, which is, I'm sure, a decent concept within S&C as well. For your S&C listeners, it's you have to be good at this skill, right? So a beginner it is not physically capable of training hard, because they have a coordination deficit, right? So when you have a deficit in coordination, what is stopping you from training hard is that deficit in coordination. And when you train for a while, what we call skill acquisition in powerlifting, you get better at a movement. And then once you get better at that movement, you can train harder. So when a beginner does a volume study and it's 8 weeks long, they probably spend the first 6 weeks learning what a leg extension is. And you might say, no, of course they get it right in the first week. That is, maybe they understand how the exercise works. That doesn't mean their brain is capable of telling their body yet to train close to failure on said exercise. So a beginner who will grow from anything grows in this study because they will grow from anything, but also because they cannot physically train as hard. And when you cannot physically train as hard, you need to do more sets to make up for the fact that each individual set isn't as effective as it could be if you could train hard. So let's say, for the sake of the example, I do a set to failure. Someone else might do a set to failure as a complete beginner.
As far as then,
cool. So what I was saying
question.
basically is, if I do a set to failure, it's going to be really effective. If a beginner does a set to failure, it's not really going to be that effective, because their idea of failure is so much worse than my idea of failure. So they can handle high volume. As you become more trained, it's a lower RPE. No matter how hard they try, no matter if we both actually physically fail the last rep, it's for different reasons. Theirs is because they don't have the coordination. Mine is because I've reached my maximum tolerable perception of effort. So it's completely different. It's not applicable for trained lifters.
Is this your bias here, or is this the science?
I mean, this is logical. This is
it matches my experience.
I agree with you. I agree.
First 6 weeks, people end a set of dumbbell bench because the dumbbell's about to smack them in the face, not because it's velocity loss or something like that. And I think also the good example of putting someone in a leg extension, it's the symptoms and side effects of genuinely hitting failure on a leg extension. A noob would think that they're dying so many reps before that, because it's it is such a unique sensation, that maximal quad contraction, even with fucking 10 RIR. I mean, but yeah, so it's just that learning process.
So when they
learning
don't
how to
train
create a
as close to failure, That's it. They don't accrue as much fatigue, which just means that they can do more, and they should. And then when you learn to train hard, I mean, you could do high volume and low intensity if you want. It's certainly not efficient, but you could do it, and I could grow from I could do it, but it would be a waste of my time and be boring as fuck. So what would be the point of that? And then there's just looking at there's two more main points is, right, when you see a high volume study showing growth, it's like, well, it's just muscle swelling beyond a certain point, right? Like if I do a heap of work, I draw fluid into the muscle. It's edema. It can last for a long time. I do like a little my measurement method, whatever I use in the study, and the muscle appears bigger than it actually is because there's fluid sitting in there, and not because the muscle fibers have increased in size. So when you do high volume, which causes more edema, you see a bigger increase in muscle swelling when you take the measurements 48 hours after the last resistance training session, which is what the studies do.
A lot of people were writing this off, but this actually seems pretty relevant to me. Yeah. Like, because I know a lot of people have heard this criticism and they're like, oh, no, what are you talking about? But I'm like, we're already dealing with instruments that suck ass. Like, I hate that ultrasounds, and I know it is accepted. Whatever's accepted. Smarter people than me fucking decide that shit. But there's just a little part of me that hates the idea that it's like, I mean, even these evidence-based people, they say that it's like, it's not many guys who are good at ultrasounding muscles to figure out how much they've grown. I'm like, this doesn't sound great. But then I also want to appreciate for the evidence-based side, because some people, I know I've done this, I've slandered the researchers too much, but I sat down and thought, if I had to sit there and do a fucking study, just how much money I'd need and how hard it'd be to get all fucking participants, enough smart cunts to crunch all the data. It's like, it's a fucking shit show. The whole thing, you know?
Yeah, and it's the research is just our best guess, and I think if you interpret the research as the be all end all, and you don't also consider how it works in practice or what other people have found with anecdotes, then you are by definition a science-based lifter, and you are not actually using an evidence-based practice. You know, like that would be where the gimmick comes from, is just listening to studies and nothing else.
Yeah. True. That's a good point, actually. So the whole thing at the end of the day is always about embracing the whole thing. It's like all forms of evidence in front of us, respecting the hierarchy, but then also not being a snob about it as well, and just applying some common sense.
And to be fair,
I was going to say, I feel like you can have respect for the scientific method while also acknowledging where sports science is at. Like, that's where I sit, like, full respect to the scientific method, but sports science is underfunded, and it is the jocks of the science crowd. Like, there's no way we got the best guys and girls. Oh, we need more girls.
Oh, well, the best guys and girls are certainly not doing exercise science. They're on the moon. Like, it's just, that's the fact of the matter, is like, I got a B minus in high school biology, and I got an exercise science degree. I certainly tried a lot harder at uni and learned some more stuff, but there's the barrier to entry is not high. And like I did well. For anyone in Queensland, I got an OP3. I'm not stupid, but like it certainly is not hard to do that. And when you see who is doing the research and the way they are presenting the research to us currently, and you guys would see when people post studies, you read through and you go, that doesn't sound like the right conclusion from that study. That is because those people are actually like just misconstruing it or getting it wrong or looking at it, incorrectly. It's not like any other field. Like, someone comes out with a new part of string theory, you're like, yeah, sure, talk to me about that. We're going to listen to physicists, but in the exercise science world, it's more of a joke, really. Like, it's, and I'm part of the industry, so like it's.
It is what it is.
I'm friends with researchers, and they do not like the way the data is being presented to us. I won't name this person, but they tell me the majority of actual scientists is very quiet at the moment, or are very quiet, because they are worried about the bigger people who are reporting the science to us. And you guys just have to trust me that I'm not lying. There are a lot of scientists who stay quiet in fear of being shut down by a bigger account, who are strongly in disagreement with the way that the science is being sort of delivered to us currently by accounts that you would all follow.
It is interesting as well. Like, one thing I heavily disagree with is the hijacking of evidence-based as an identity. And I understand how it came about. And I'm like so sympathetic to that because, you know, we emerged from this bro science era and then people are like, hey, what about fucking science? Like, let's start doing science on this shit. But I think the moment, like, people latch onto it for branding and it just gives you this shine and this polish that, and it's self-anointed and it's a cloutocracy. It's not a meritocracy of science communication. It's at the end of the day. Yeah. It's like I said, the whole thing's a fucking shit show.
It doesn't help when we have machine versus free weight studies. So, I mean,
yeah, I mean, like we did studies recently on the fact that like straps don't increase grip strength, and that was the finding. And I'm like, what? Have you ever been inside a gym? Have you ever done a set of T-bars? Like, the fact that we can arrive at conclusions like straps do not increase pulling strength is just highlights how big of a problem we have within the exercise science field. And the people reporting that study, they don't, like, when we all know where we saw that study, right? It was on Menno's page, and he could have used some critical thinking and been like, well, this can't be true. I'm at least going to like add a note that maybe we should use straps when we train back, which is, I don't think that's a hot take. And it's like, all the people are like, yep, I knew it. My grip wasn't a limiting factor. It's like, yeah, I mean, you're weak in general. That's why there's no back to limit there. But basically, like, we're seeing studies on things we absolutely do not need to see studies on. It's like, who is funding this and why? And what can we get some research on, like, how the traps work and like some important things, like, you know, whether a pec deck is better than a pec press. We don't even have data on the pec press versus the pec deck.
Crazy.
I don't think
that's crazy.
It's like the most common possible exercise in the gym. Would it not be a pec press? And we don't have any research on it compared to a pec deck. Like, but we're doing straps on studies on straps rather. It's crazy.
And just like 1,000 studies on how to grow your ass. But I understand that. And I'm not necessarily against the line of inquiry there because that is information that benefits it all. One more before I hand it over to Jacob. I just want to ask you briefly about your thoughts on periodization. And like, again, like obviously like we think that like, you know, the planning of training is an acceptable notion and stuff like that. But just this idea that I guess you would bias like in a block structure, different qualities. And the reason why I think that this is stupid, I'll just show my hand. I think it sort of comes from a place that people talking about like maybe like becoming desensitized to a stimulus or like some sort of shit or like, well, but then why I'm sort of into it, I'm like, well, you can't do the same shit for the rest of your life as much as like it might be nice, but you'll just get over it. And you sort of talked about, again, like you have to be excited to maximally recruit muscle units. So like I do see the value in doing different shit from time to time. And I'm also not against, you know, people straw man it like that I'm going to ignore someone's competition schedule. But again, that's all just individualization. But yeah, as far as like, because what do they say in bodybuilding? What are the different phases you could maybe do? Like a metabolic phase.
Yeah,
and you could do like a neuro phase.
I know. Yeah, the sarcoplasmic hypertrophy phase, which is not even something that you can do. So we often hear things like this where it's just like, oh, we're the only phase that you could really do in bodybuilding is like an off season and an on season, right? So like maybe you would have a different drug protocol and you like the big standout
so
things.
It's more
like
nutritional and supplemental driven.
It is not
versus train.
Yeah. And so when you look at like training in terms of phases, it's like, okay, the most specific that you can, like physiologically, the most specific that you can be with hypertrophy is which muscles am I giving the most stimulus this block or this off season. There is nothing more specific than that is really possible or that would actually be useful. So it's just like, all right, well, the judges said my calves were lacking. Next off season, we bring the calves up, we increase the frequency, we put them at the start of the session, you know, maybe we like do a few different things for them, we try out some new exercises. It's the whole idea of periodization within bodybuilding is just like, well, it doesn't, like people will often like build up the volume. If that is your sport, that is powerlifting, S&C, sure.
We absolutely love doing this show. And one of the most exciting things for us is watching it grow because it means we can commit more time to it as well as have access to better guests to bring you even more quality content. One of the most impactful ways you can help us grow the show is by shouting it out, screenshotting this episode, and sharing it on your stories to let people know that you're listening. Don't underestimate how influential you can be on helping us grow this show, and we appreciate it so much. Anyway, back to the show.
So just going off the back of the pro low volume training, something that we always ask, the cliche question, is where do you stand on the minimum effective dose of hypertrophy and strength as well? And is it muscle specific, or is there much more nuance that you have behind that?
I mean, why would you do more than you had to, right? Like, I think that we have this idea you hear from like these crazy coaches where it's just like, oh, we're going to do as much as we can possibly recover from. And that is assuming we all have the same definition of recovery, right? So what that would mean would be your muscle fibers returning to their baseline strength. So if I do a heavy set today, I will not be back at baseline strength tomorrow. This is evident if you just try max your bench press out, probably not going to be as good the second day. That is more evident with like a set of chest press because it's more isolated movement. But basically, like your minimum effective dose would be probably the smartest way to go about doing it, right? Because that dose is much lower than people think it is. So if you were to say that to someone and they started doing the minimum, their definition of the minimum effective dose, it'd probably just be like normal volume, or even like moderate to high volume, because people have such a misconstrued idea of it. But yeah, it is muscle specific. There are muscles that tend to recover a lot slower, so pecs and arms, and there will be people who throw out anecdotes, well, that's not the findings that I've had. Well, it depends again on your definition, right? If unless you can test your muscle fibers returning to baseline strength, which I guarantee that you cannot test because we're not in a scientific lab, if you think that recovery is the absence of soreness, then the definition is wrong. If you think that recovery is a day or two has passed, then you are wrong, because it is muscle specific. It is training specific. There will be increased recovery demands from increased volume. So like people just don't know what recovery is, and they start throwing things around like minimum effective dose based on the idea that I'm not sore. Well, it's like, soreness, we don't even know how it happens for a start. So how could that possibly be an important factor when it comes to recovery? Like, I'll just say, if you are sore, you are not recovered, but the absence of soreness does not mean that you are recovered, you know? So
how the fuck do I do an arm specialization phase? Because that's my keen interest.
What you do for an arm specialization phase is you just do them first in the workout, do them first on Monday. Yeah, so all you would do there, you wouldn't increase the volume. Do them on Monday after your 2 rest days on the weekend. Do them first in the session.
Still away.
And just think about it a little bit harder. Get a little bit more psychologically. Yeah, there's a way. I mean, maybe not genetically.
No, this makes a lot of sense, because while I did up the volume, I mean, I didn't notice a response, but then my nutrition wasn't amazing either. So, and again, I was like, it's more than just me. But I have never put them at the start. And there are certain logistical reasons why I can't do that as well, but I'm going to find a way. I might just personally add another day where I just go in and hit arms fresh. I can at least make sure I do that once a week. And I can see that making a difference.
So does the minimum effective dose that you do is just playing around with volumes per week with different individuals and seeing what's going up, what's going down? Or is it a bit deeper than that? Or is it that simple?
It's really simple. Like, because I have an entire system of things and they all like physiologically link together. My entire coaching system is based on like how physiology works, right? So I can then just be like, okay, well, let's just start with somewhere between like 4 and 9 sets a week for each muscle, pecs and arms being on the lower end, some of the leg muscles being on the higher end, and then see how progress goes. I'm never prescribing over 10 for anything, so I'm not even going to bother with that. But if progress isn't maybe what I'd expect, and we check all the variables, so sleep, nutrition, stress, etc., I'm watching all the training videos, and I think to myself, this client should be progressing better, I simply reduce the volume by 1. If the progressive overload picks up, which would be our metric of tracking progress, you know that you were not recovering, because if you then take away recovery demand in the form of 1 set and progress picks up, you can assume you weren't recovering, because as soon as you took that away, you got stronger faster. So by any means, if you are not progressing, you should be then taking away volume to see if that speeds it up. If that doesn't speed it up, you don't have to go back to the original volume. You could just keep the volume where you brought it down to. So you might go from 6 to 5 sets, and then you just start looking at other things, or you would just be a bit more patient and wait for a little bit longer to see if it picks up. But it's really simple. You start in that range. 4 to 8 is where I would typically go for everything. I don't know if I program much above 8 now. And then, like, for example, I had a lifter report some soreness to me. We've been training together for a few months. It shouldn't be happening. We took away a set of pec deck and the soreness got better. So it's like, okay, well, we're doing a bit too much pec deck. It's super logical, right? Like, another client, I had a sore chest as well. Okay, you're probably stretching a bit too much in the bottom of this dip. Next week, stretch a bit less. Bada bing, bada boom, not sore. Okay, we were stretching too much. Like, it's if you understand recovery, like, the soreness is a good indicator of it. It's very helpful if you're doing something wrong, because you can just get rid of the soreness and then you know you're doing it better. If you're chasing it, then the whole code, if you're chasing the soreness, then you've got some revision to do, but I can't help you there. But yeah, that's why it's important to understand the mechanisms of stuff, because, like, such an important anecdote, like, oh, you've got to chase fatigue, you've got to chase soreness, is so physiologically incorrect and so backward, but you'd believe it if a big dude told you in the gym. If you just do 10 minutes of research, you just Google, like, oh, is soreness and hypertrophy linked? No. Okay, great. It doesn't matter.
What was the study?
That's kind of why anecdotes are annoying.
I saw a clip. One of the guys, what did they do to his quad? Oh yeah, that's it. They were so one of these tests where they were trying to see if there was a association or correlation between muscle damage. Sorry, this one was not muscle soreness, but I guess that's sort of the proxy that we're using when we're not in a lab. But yeah, so they laid him on the side with his leg on the physio table, and they had like a 2 meter PVC pipe, and they just dropped a dumbbell down it repeatedly.
On his leg?
Yeah, one study I saw. Yeah, on his leg, just bruised the shit out of it.
And it was on...
Just to see if it grew muscle. If damage.
Oh, if muscle damage. Like abrupt damage. Wow, wow, okay.
Which I don't know if there was any, I guess a little bit.
This is a good reflection of the exercise science. So I think this is a perfect example, Angus, because this is where someone's money is going. I mean, that's a hilarious study. I would take a wild guess and say that he didn't grow any muscle without mechanical tension, but it's an interesting theory.
Dude, the coolest study I've ever heard someone being a part of was one where they somehow got approval to put like something that would stop the pain into people's spines, and they're doing like a VO2 max test. So I've seen if you just wild shit. Like being a part of that. You know,
like, if that was if we could do that, like, and I'm sure we can in the next 100 years with AI. You could then literally grow so much more muscle because your brain tells you to stop a set at your maximum perceived tolerable effort. So when you finish a set, the common belief is that your muscle runs out of force. This is not true, because if you put an electrical stimulation in a muscle, you send a signal to the muscle via a node, it will then contract harder. So we know for a fact it's not about force production. It's about your maximum tolerable perception of effort, which is based on your cardio, your pain, your distraction, your coordination. If you can take pain away...
Is this though? Like, is it just going to blow people? Or do you think it's such a good alarm system? It goes off so early that we could just, it's like going a little bit past that's very useful and maybe safe still, potentially.
I think that, I don't know if taking it away would produce a lot more hypertrophy, because then you're just going to have a lot more fatigue. But it would be interesting to see the difference then between someone like 1 week doing a set of whatever, then the next week coming back with this robotic whatever in their system and doing an extra like 15 reps. Well, it can't possibly be an adaptation. It has to be that perception of effort is why we terminate sets, and that seems to be what it is. You know, your brain goes, we have reached the most we can possibly do, let's stop. And that's why like motivation is important, because if you're more motivated, you're with the boys, whatever, you can train harder. We've all been there. It's very easy to test that theory. So that would be like, I don't know if it's ethical, but it certainly would work.
Isn't it like that meme where they got that guy's back squatting and they got that, I don't know if anyone's seen it, and
they
there's like
do
a
get
wire on his back and they literally shock him at the bottom of the squat.
Yeah, well, I think there are certainly ways. I mean, imagine like you've seen guys like fail squats and someone will come up behind them and like jab them in the ass and they like actually stand back. I don't know if that's a joke or not, but the concept makes sense. Like if you were really motivated to avoid something, you'd probably stand back up. Yeah.
Life or death scenario sort of thing.
Yeah, totally.
We should probably wrap this up because we're getting close to the golden hour. But one thing I wanted to get to, whatever, we'll tee up another show. But I know you just had a massive launch week. So first of all, congratulations for releasing a hypertrophy course. So it's a hypertrophy match. There's a few different levels to it. But yeah, explain it for everyone who's listening and a little bit about the grind and the process because I think it should be celebrated. But what can people get their hands on?
I appreciate that, man. It's called A Coach's Guide to Maximizing Hypertrophy. It's a course that I wish I had when I started, when I got out of exercise science and got into the field, because we kind of presented with these ideas from different people. But, what's true and how do I implement that into an overarching system of coaching? It's one thing to be told that maybe lower reps are better for hypertrophy, but how do I actually practically, start coaching that? So what I've done is I've gone through pretty much every topic I could think of and I put it into, I believe it's 48 videos over 30 topics. It's got two tiers. It's got a more and less interactive tier with me, obviously a more affordable option, but it's for beginner coaches, experienced coaches. I've taken over I think it's over 35 people through it already in the last 6 months and had great success. And it's, like I said, it's what I wish I had when I started coaching. I've taken beginner coaches, people who just wanted it for their own lifting experience, and very experienced coaches of over 15 years through. So it's been a success so far. We did actually launch again yesterday for the second intake. It will be open as long as there are spots. So if you're interested, if you want to learn to be you want to start coaching, you want to learn to be a better coach, you can find that on my page. It'll be somewhere, I guess, in the podcast. But no, I appreciate the kind words. It'll be in the notes. There you go. Yeah. So that's up. You can find that in my link tree. But yeah, that's the sort of I literally started because someone was like, "Hey, would you ever think about like writing a course?" And I was like, "That's a good idea. Maybe I'll help other coaches do what I do, since people seem to enjoy my content." And that was sort of that's I guess all I did. Like, I'm sure that's how every course ever has started. Someone's like, "Oh, would you ever teach me that?" You're like, "Oh, actually, yeah, I would teach you that." And that's how that is actually.
Because the idea of pricing it for an individual, that's again why I made mine. Someone hit me up. He was like, "How much to mentor all my gym staff?" And I knew the number I wanted to say, but I was like scared to say it. So I was like,
Alex Hormozy, $50,000.
I'll just do a mentorship. I wish I had a Hormozy mindset, but I just don't. So shout out to the sociopaths who do. I mean, I guess we all need to embrace it a little bit. But yeah. Anyway, hopefully you're all a bit more confident on how to grow your muscles, and we'll catch you next week.
Thank you very much.